Yo, what's up guys, and welcome back to a new video. In our last video we spoke a little bit about Slayer hero talents, and today it is time to talk about Mountain Thane. Now I will be focusing a little bit more on the Fury aspect than I will be on the Protection Warrior aspect, since I don't really play Protection Warrior, but let's dive straight into it. First of all, we see Lightning Strikes. Damaging enemies with Thunderclap, Revenge, Raging Blow or Execute has a 10% chance to also strike one with a Lightning Bolt, dealing moderate nature damage, and Lightning Strikes occurs 50% more often during Avatar. Basically, just a nice little bonus damage, not that much. We will always use Raging Blow, Thunderclap, Execute, Revenge for Prot Warrior, so just some extra bonus damage. Now below that we have Ground Current. Lightning Strike also deal low damage to enemies near their target. Damage reduced beyond 5 targets. Basically just an AoE version of what we've seen on the Lightning Strikes version. Not much we can talk about here, just some extra bonus damage, not much further to discuss. On the right side we see Strength of the Mountain. Shield Slam damage increased by 20% and Bloodthirst and Rampage damage increased by 10%. We've also seen this on the Slayer tree, just a flat out bonus damage on our Rampage and on our Bloodthirst. Once again, I see that Bloodthirst in there, which makes me think that they want us to use that Bloodthirst button a little bit more than we're doing right now. Although, just a flat out damage increase. Once again, nothing too exciting there. So let's move on to the left side of the tree. Call of Thunder. For protection, that means Storm Strike or nature damage your abilities deal is increased by 5% and Storm Strike damage ignores armor. Thunderclap damage is also increased by 50%, just once again some bonus damage there, not much to discuss about. And for Fury we see a very similar thing. Storm Strike or nature damage your abilities deal is increased by 5% and Storm Strike damage ignores armor. Thunderclap damage increased by 50% and it generates 5 rage, and improved Whirlwind and Meat Cleaver now improve Thunderclap as well as Whirlwind. Now this is a bit of an interesting one, because as Fury right now we do not use Thunderclap. We have not used it for a very long time, so for them to put this in here makes me think that they want us to start using Thunderclap. I'm not too sure about how good this will be, especially because Thunderclap is not really a good button for us to press right now. It costs us too many talent points to get into it efficiently, and the damage of it is also just very neglectable. So I'm very curious what they're gonna do with that. So below that we see Thunder Blast. Shield Slam and Bloodthirst have a 20% chance to grant you Thunder Blast, stacking up to 2 charges. Now what is Thunder Blast? Thunder Blast. Your next Thunderclap becomes a Thunder Blast that deals Storm Strike damage. Not really too much to go off there. Once again, just a flat out damage increase it seems, but it does buff up that Thunderclap once again, which seems a bit odd to me, once again, because we don't really use Thunderclap. So I'm gonna have to see what they do with that. On the middle here we see Storm Shield. Intervening a target grants them a shield for 5 seconds that absorb magic damage equal to 3 times your armor. Now I'm actually a very big fan of this, and if you guys remember, in Shadowlands we already had a conduit that did pretty much the same thing, where if we intervened a target, their damage taken would be reduced. Now this is an absorb shield, so it's a little bit different than it was in Shadowlands, but nonetheless I do really like this because it gives us a little bit more utility, especially in high damaging scenarios where we can just intervene the healer or a squishy friendly and let them take a little bit less damage. So I really like the way that they're going with this talent. Below that we see Storm Bolts. Storm Bolt also hits 2 additional nearby targets, stunning them for 2 seconds. Now this has been hyped up a lot, and it is a very cool talent because it's basically an AoE Storm Bolt for us. Storm Bolt is on a pretty low cooldown, so for us to be able to stun 3 targets at once is quite a big deal. Now I'm not really too sure about how well this is manageable, or if it's going to be completely random. If they implement something that it would prioritize casters, for example, I think that would be a very cool change. If not, I do still think that there's quite some usage for this talent specifically. Now on the right side we see Flashing Skies. Chance for lightning strikes to critically strike is increased by 5% and their critical strike damage is increased by 10%. Once again, just a flat bonus. On top of that, lightning damage that they're trying to implement into this specific talent tree. I'm not too sure how to feel about it because we don't really know the damage numbers that these lightning strikes are gonna do. If they're gonna do a high amount of damage, then this is probably gonna be pretty good. If not, then I think this entire side of the tree becomes pretty useless. Now, below that we see Valarjar training, and that means that our lightning strike reduces the cooldown of Ravager by half a second. Now, we do use Ravager quite a bit in the build that we've seen before with anger management. So if we can reduce that cooldown of Ravager even more, that would actually be pretty cool. However, Ravager needs to be aligned with either one of our major cooldowns in order for us to actually be able to use it properly. If we use it outside of our major cooldowns, then the value of Ravager goes down quite significantly. So unless we're gonna get that much cooldown reduction that we're gonna be able to use it twice in the same amount of time that we would normally use it once, I don't really see too much value of this talent specifically. Now, moving on to the bottom left, Victory Rush increases your maximum health by 10% for 5 seconds. This is basically the equivalent of a rally. I do think that this has some niche usages. However, usually you want to use your Victory Rush when you're in need of some on-demand healing and not necessarily to survive a big incoming hit. I'm not too sure about how well this is gonna work out in M+ and raid scenarios. I do think it has some cool usages, but I think it's making the talent a little bit more complicated than it has to be. Below that, we see Thunder Blast reducing the damage you take by 4% for 5 seconds. Now, in the talent above us, we already saw that we have Thunder Blast available with Bloodthirst or with Shield Slam, and that damage reduction that we're gonna get from it, I'm not too sure if 4% is something big enough for us to be actually playing around it. I do think it's kind of nice in that in some higher scenarios, higher key levels, that you could have some usage out of this. However, it seems a little bit underwhelming compared to what we've seen in other trees like Slayer, for example. So I'm not too sure about this one. I do think there is some usage for it, but I'm not too stoked about it per se. In the middle here, we see Gathering Clouds. Your attacks trigger lightning strikes 15% more often. Once again, based around those lightning strikes, we don't really know how much damage those lightning strikes are gonna do. I do think it's more of a value for Prot Warrior than it is for Fury Warrior, unless it's gonna skill with like some other stuff. However, it's hard to say how good of a talent this is gonna be. Below that, we see Torm's Might. Lightning Strike generates 3 Rage, and Revenge, Raging Blow, and Execute damage increased by 15%. Now, once again, we see a flat damage increase in some of our major abilities that we use pretty often. I do think that this talent tree becomes a little bit boring with all the flat damage increases that we're seeing, and that's a lot of passive stuff rather than actives or procs or other cool stuff. I don't think that the lightning strikes generating 3 rage is going to benefit us a whole lot. I don't think it's going to matter at all. 3 rage is not going to do too much for us. Maybe if it procs on multiple targets at once, that you're getting more rage, that it's going to add some kind of value. However, I don't really think that the rage generation is that big of a deal. Moving on to the right side, we see Burst of Power. Lightning strikes have a 20% chance to make your next 2 shield slams or bloodthirsts have no cooldown. Once again, we see that focus on bloodthirst. Like I said before, also in the Slayer video, that it seems as if they want to make that bloodthirst button a little bit better to press for us, because at the moment it's just not very nice to press that bloodthirst button. I do think this is their way of trying to make us press it a little bit more. I don't really see how not having any cooldown on a bloodthirst is gonna make a massive difference unless they massively spike up the damage that it does. So I'm not really too sure what value we're gonna gain on Fury Warrior from this. I do think that the 2 shield slams not having any cooldown for Prot Warrior is a cool little change, and it will help them a little bit more than it helps Fury Warrior. So all in all, I don't really think that this talent is gonna matter too much. Now on the bottom we see Avatar of Storms. Casting Avatar grants 2 charges of Thundering Blast and resets the cooldown of Thunderclap. Well, Avatar is not active, lightning strikes have a 10% chance to grant you Avatar for 4 seconds. I do actually like that they're trying to put some way of proc in there in this talent tree specifically. I do think we're kind of lacking those proc things that we see in Slayer a lot in this talent build. I'm not too sure how much RNG is going to be involved in this because we don't really know how often those lightning strikes are going to proc, how much damage it's going to do. I don't think that the Thunder Collapse cooldown reset is gonna matter at all unless they're massively gonna up the damage that Thunderclap does. So I'm not too sure about the Thunderclap part. I do think that the Avatar part is pretty cool, depending on how often we get those procs, but I guess time will have to tell. On the bottom we see Thunderblast. Your next Thunderclap becomes a Thunderblast that deals Storm Strike damage. Nothing really too complicated about that one. We've seen the talent before here that it just deals extra Storm Strike damage. Nothing too spectacular there, and all in all, I just think that this talent tree is kind of boring compared to what we've seen in the Slayer tree. I do think it's providing some nice stuff for Protection Warrior. For Fury Warrior, maybe a little bit less. It seems that they're trying to like make a combination of Enhancement Shaman into Fury Warrior, which seems a bit odd with all the lightning stuff. It all depends pretty much on how much damage it's gonna do, and based on how much damage it's gonna do, we can really compare the two between each other if it's gonna make sense to run this build at all, or if it's just straight up Slayer all the way. So I'm very curious to hear what you guys think about this talent tree. Like I said, I do think it's kind of boring compared to what we've seen in the Slayer tree. But let me know in the comments down below what you would like to see done with this specific talent tree, if you like it or not, if you think it's boring or not, and if you want to play Slayer or if you want to play Mountain Thane. And as always, hope to see you guys in the next one.